So if you're assuming the cost of having a child, but the benefit is going to be externalized into society because you're going to shift back the distribution that you were talking about, the inverted pyramid in Japan, and especially in South Korea. I think South Korea is the worst,
Yes,
is in the worst situation. By having the kid, you are helping society have a healthier distribution of the population, which has a huge effect. I think the magnitude of the relevance of a distribution of the demographics are destiny. It is set in stone. You cannot create 20-year-olds now. You are 20 years late. Well, 20 years and 9 months late. But it's so... Maybe there's a case to be made that the state has to internalize this market failure. And I'm a libertarian myself, so if I have a bias, it's against this. Or if I'm trying to make the case for it, because I'm not sure if this is true, I'm not sure if this is right, but maybe there's a positive externality big enough that cannot be internalized, and that has to be done. But of course, in the 50s and even before the boomers, they were so many, because I think societally, exactly as you were saying, the state has little influence in increasing fertility. If anything, with oppression, it can decrease it, as the one-child policy in China was quite effective. But now getting back the fertility, once the population, the society, the culture has changed towards appreciating other things more than having children, and where I come from, Spain, has the lowest fertility rate in the whole Europe, 1.1
really?
children.
Oh.
It's
Despite
crazy.
Catholicism.
No, because of Catholicism. Because now the population has shifted. The religiosity transition that has occurred in Spain is almost not seen anywhere else. It has gone from being a very religious country 40 years ago to now, well, 40 maybe not, 60 years ago, to now being a very, very irreligious country. Very
really?
few. It's incredible.
I didn't know that.
It has been so fast, and so few of my friends are Catholic or religious at all, that it is remarkable. So I think Catholicism, I don't know if it would have kept the fertility rates up, but the transition away from Catholicism has been part of what has led to the decrease in the fertilities. But you were absolutely right when you said that it has more to do with the culture and the appreciation of having kids. That's, I think, the biggest driver of the fertility rate, because in Spain, for example, the biggest focus is you have to enjoy life. You have to be able to go to the coffee shop every day and spend 10 euros there, and have Netflix and travel to Bali twice a year and have a lot of vacation. And all of those things that you want to travel the world, discover yourself until your 30s or mid 30s, then you run way past your window of fertility as a woman. A man may be able to get away with it a bit more, but as a female, as a woman, which has a very narrow fertility window between the age of 18 and 35, that's your window. And if you don't take advantage of it, and the reason why it's not being taken advantage of or used is societal. You're absolutely right. But do you have any clue of how this transition socially could be done? Because I'm very hopeless.
Yeah. I wonder if some of what we've been talking about with genetics is important. You know, that at an evolutionary point of view, having children is something that we're designed to do. And a lot of people will tell you, I mean, I feel this way. I'd have as many kids as I could, because it's you know, I don't want to cause trouble or anxiety for people who aren't having kids. That's fine. Have that choice. But we don't have enough people saying it's the most wonderful thing in life. I mean, you think falling in love with someone is great. It'll change. But your love for your kids, you know, it's deep. And evolution designed it to be that way. So you're not fighting against something biological. You're going with your evolutionary flow. So we're, you know, and it's not all easy. It can be difficult, but it still is a very rewarding part of life. But being a Buddhist, I know everything's impermanent and things can change with your relationship with your kid. And you don't have kids because you want them to take care of you as an older adult, because that doesn't happen anymore. But for that time, and it's a long time, right? I mean, 20 years at least. And now I find I'm more involved with my grandchildren than I was with my kids, because I was busy working and all of that. But so I think, you know, we need to recognize that genetically, there's really something pushing us to have kids, and we'll find it a very rewarding relationship, because this person's 50% like you genetically. Your spouse isn't. at a DNA level, there is assortative mating, but you only correlate genetically with your spouse about zero point 0.1. You can actually do this at a DNA level. You are picking someone who's sort of like you, especially in intelligence, it turns out. That's the most highest assortative mating. But it's only 0.1. You're 0.5 genetically related with your kid, and you learn to appreciate not just the similarities, but the differences. So I think really a lot of the enjoyment of being a parent and recognizing genetics is that you marvel at watching this person become who they are genetically in a way, rather than thinking you're going to make them be what you want them to be. It's an amazing experience. Now, I would also say in balance that a lot of older people I know, if you get them in their cups, as we say, a little bit drunk or whatever, and say, how was it having kids? And a lot of people would say, yeah, it's pretty good. I sort of remember how wonderful it was. But I think a lot of people in honesty would say, my life would have been okay if I didn't have kids. It's a bit like the military, like the Marines or something. You'd say, well, it was I learned a lot. It was an experience. I wouldn't want to do it again. And I think definitely later in life, people, like you talk about older men, I wouldn't want to have kids now because, well, and it wouldn't be fair to them because I'd be dead by the time they're a young adult. So it is important to balance that, but that's the Buddhist thing. You got to live in the moment and say, this is great while it happens. And I can guarantee that there will be moments of emotional enjoyment that are unparalleled with anything else in life. So you think you love your spouse or whatever, and it's a different sort of love. But boy, this is intense, So it's a wonderful thing having kids, and I and then when you recognize the genetics behind that, this isn't just some current fad in society. I mean, this is us as a species, and then I think we need to do more to value having kids, and realizing, you know, so what? You get another few papers published if you don't have a kid or whatever. Who cares? I don't know of any academic. A lot of my friends are dying now. I spend a lot of my time going to festivals and funerals, it seems. And none of them would ever say, God, I just wish I had written that other paper. One more paper I really wanted to write. At the end of their life, or like in that lovely movie, Love Actually, where you have this scene, or scenes about, people coming back in airports, or the 9/11 stuff. Those text messages people sent. No one was saying, "Oh God, I was going to close this deal, and I got it." People are it's all about love, isn't it? And so I think it's important to keep that perspective on things. And if it's all about love in some ways, having kids is a love experience unlike anything else. So maybe there's a bit of a message we can help people with here. It's not really a genetic message so much, and we got to recognize that genetics says there'll be differences in how much parents are willing to be parents. Because it does mean you have to, it's not a selfish thing, and surprising, even though parenting and loving your kids seems to be evolutionarily constrained in a way, there's still big individual differences. Just like with love relationships, some people aren't able to give up control, as you were talking about, and really fall in love, and that means you're going to get hurt. So some people aren't willing to do that, but I think parenting will take most people pretty far along in terms of that. When you first see your baby born, that really is an amazing experience. So let's encourage people to have kids, but I'm not saying it's a bad thing not to have kids. It's just we need to be more reinforcing of people who do have kids, because there's a lot of sacrifices. You have to sacrifice one of those trips to Bali, for example. But I got to say, at the end of life, later in life, like me, looking back on this stuff, I really get the Buddhism thing. I don't remember that trip to Bali. Really, I can look at the photographs or whatever. That's great. But, it's not that big a deal. Whereas my son's here and his grandson's here, and so that goes on, and it helps you think about continuity in life. It isn't genetics. The thing I don't like about Buddhism is the reincarnation notion, which is crazy. But actually, genetics is reincarnation, isn't it? My
Yes.
my son and my grandson are definitely, those are my genes, and you could see it. We just look alike, even. And so what? I'm dead. I won't appreciate it, but there's still something about enjoying in the moment the fact that there is some continuity there.
Yes.
Despite the general impermanence of life, and the fact that that extra trip to Bali isn't going to mean much to you a decade from now.
Exactly.
God, we're
And
really getting into philosophy now.
no, but yeah, this is an extremely important point. I think the demographic situation of Western countries, and this is a point that has not been talked about enough, not in our conversation, but in general. The countries of the second and third world have their fertilities drop faster than they did back in a few decades ago in Western Europe. And I've checked the research from Jesus Fernandez Villaverde. It's one of the most enlightened, I think, researchers in this matter, and he hypothesizes that these third and second world countries will stabilize beneath the fertility rates of the first world countries, which is mind blowing. I do not understand why it happens, but he has some serious and very solid research backing it, and I wonder why that is. But even from a existential perspective, you and I didn't come here out of nowhere. We didn't pop out into existence. It was two adults who were fairly functional, who decided to not go to Bali or to not do the marginal thing that they could have done in exchange for bringing someone up. It took a huge amount of effort and time to bring both of us up, and it is only because of that we exist now. And so it's a kind of, if you don't pay the amortization of your machines, you can run on a bigger profit, artificial profit, for while the machine lasts, because we have so much income and little expenses. This is wonderful. Yeah, sure, until the machine breaks, and then you have to, the whole business collapses. And so, yep. Sorry.
Two general things there. There's one major factor is switching from an agrarian society to an industrial society. In an agrarian society, having kids are workers. So there's a huge motivation to have as many kids as possible. So that's one huge factor that we're not going to change. But the second factor is that despite what you said, my parents had kids. I'm a boomer, born right after the Second World War. And there was no birth control then, and there was no abortion. That wasn't in the States until the 70s, really. It wasn't really available till the 80s. So back then, a lot of people had kids just because they had sex and they couldn't control whether they had kids or not. So that's changed as well. And we're not going to go back on that. And so I think as I don't know why it is, as societies become richer, maybe it's just a financial model or something. It's not financially so great to have kids. I mean, they're not going to take care of you later in life, and so that's going to be a tough nut to crack. But yeah.
But why is it that they're not going to take care of you when you're old? I think that the negative externality I was arguing for to justify the intervention of the state subsidizing things so that they are free in the eyes of the consumer, even though there's someone paying for it, which is the average taxpayer. There's also another negative externality, but in this case created by the state. And I would argue it's even bigger than the presumed negative externality of the market that the state should solve. The kids don't take care of you because we've created alternatives to it. We've created, of course, the division of labor, and the market would have led to this no matter what, because we've specialized. Some people are good at taking care of others, and they do it professionally. And maybe you specialize in writing wonderful books, and I appreciate that, because now I can read Blueprint, and my life is better for that. And I couldn't have benefited to the same degree if you had the marginal kid. So maybe there's a case to be made for the specialization, but it is a truth, I think, a fact, that in the US, as the state took more of the percentage of the GDP across the centuries, the voluntary networks of help, which were mostly by family members, but also acquaintances and second-degree family members, decreased in prominence. And that's because you already were paying for that in an indirect way through taxes. So we stopped having a voluntary system, and we started having a coercive, forced, without opt-out clause out, because you have to pay Social Security, you have to pay taxes no matter what. So I don't want to ramble here into too much libertarianism. We said we weren't going to go into politics, but it could be the case that part of it has to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a second hypothesis that I have of why this is the case. As the life expectancy increases, it could be the case that society, we have a self-correcting mechanism, creating as many children as you expect them to be able to survive until they're 20. And because now we have basically zero childhood mortality in our Western countries, of course, that number had to decrease, the same way that it is now decreasing rapidly in Congo or in any Central African country, because they know that they feel that the more kids survive into their 10s, into their 20s, and that's why they logically have fewer children. But what happens if not only they get into their 20s, but into their 90s? Of course, childhood life expectancy is capped out. We're facing the biological limit of 120, and there's decreasing marginal returns to whatever environmental intervention of reducing entropy we apply. But maybe that's just a natural response. Decreased childhood mortality, increased life expectancy naturally would decrease our fertility rates. And that was a reasonable explanation for why it would self-adjust back in our evolutionary environment. But now we've taken life expectancy way far ahead of what was the case before. Maybe that has something to do. But as it stops increasing, maybe the fertility rate will go back to a stable 2.1 or 2.
Yeah. Well, it's a possibility. It's a 100-year difference, though, isn't it? I mean, at what point will young people today notice that people are living not average life expectancy of 70 years, but 72, then 76, and that does seem to be kind of incremental. And it strikes me that we think people are so rational, but I think to a greater extent than we think, people have kids because they have sex and they sort of get pregnant. I mean, I know a lot of people are very rational about it and they say, no, we can't have kids now. But I do know a lot of people who still, like in England, most people, the vast majority of couples don't get married till they have a kid. And so they're living with someone, and for one reason or another, they get pregnant, and then they decide to get married. And I do think there's a lot of with politics as well. I'm increasingly thinking we think people are really thinking this stuff through deeply and finding out about stuff and then reaching this decision, I'm going to be hard right or I'm going to be hard left. I think people stumble into this stuff. Their friends are this way, and people aren't thinking as deeply about stuff as you might expect, especially with something like having a kid. I think there's a lot more caprice in it, and you're living with someone, get pregnant, yeah, okay, let's have a kid. And if we're going to have a kid, maybe we should get married so they have a more stable family life. So I don't know how we marshal that caprice in this direction. And I think it's more along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, about just making it cool to have kids and to realize that that is a wonderful thing you're doing, not just for yourself, but we need to recognize this is the most important thing in society right now. It's more important than climate change or anything, this inverted triangle business. And I've heard people say, well, they wouldn't want to have a kid because they wouldn't want to raise them in this horrible world that we're creating. That's bullshit, I mean, it is what it is, but we're not going to have a world if, especially as AI takes over jobs. People don't say AI doesn't pay tax. Who's going to be paying this tax if our workers are AI, and we're going to lose those jobs. So I think there's going to be some dramatic transformations. And I do wonder if there aren't going to be jobs due to AI, And we're going to have to do something like UBI, Universal Basic Income, or just something like that. We're going to have to distribute the wealth somewhat differently, I think. And maybe that means we can have people don't have to move for their job. Maybe people can stay more in communities. Maybe families can stay together more. Maybe we would value if you don't have to go into work every day and then you want to be ambitious and get more money than someone else, so you work harder than someone else. Maybe you can just say, yeah, I got to do certain things, but I can stay at home and have kids. I mean, it might actually end up increasing our birth rate because it's nice having kids. But right now, it's very expensive. We don't have the money for it. But what if money isn't a problem? I don't think it's ridiculous to think that AI is going to drastically change our work environment. Most people who study this sort of thing say the sorts of jobs people are going to have don't exist now. So you can't really train kids to be something. I mean, imagine any kid who wants to do computer science and programming now, they haven't read the news, you know? So things are going to change a lot, and maybe we can marshal some of that to to make it cooler and better and nicer to having kids. Because it's not like you're duping people into having kids. You're not tricking them. It's a wonderful thing. But right now, the externalities are such, the expense and the responsibility, the sense that, oh my God, you're totally responsible for the way this kid turns out. I think that's part of it, isn't it? That you're really worried about, God, you're going to screw your kid up and you can't take that responsibility. So I think it's important for people to know it doesn't matter. You're not going to make a difference anyway. So that's one thing that would help people to have kids, is to realize this is just something you ought to enjoy. You don't have to worry about it because you don't make a difference anyway. So maybe that'll help. So I do think things are going to change, and it's great talking to you about this issue. This is way beyond my pay grade, and I do want to emphasize I don't have any more value here than anybody else in terms of exposing my values about these things. Good point to call it here, do you think?
Yes, what a wonderful dovetail that you just made, tying everything down. And I do indeed agree with you that your research and the understanding that we get from your research of the influence of genes in how we develop into what we actually are, we become who we are with time. The correlation between identical twins increases with time, doesn't decrease. Keep that in the back of your mind, because that's a monument of a data point that we have to keep always in mind. That it would increase, indeed, I think, the predisposition of people to have kids. And it's one of the biggest problems we have right now, the inverted pyramid, as you mentioned. And I'm very thankful to you, Robert, for having this chat with me today.
Great chat with you. It was really wonderful talking to you, Alex.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
very
much.
much.